Alrighty, hello ladies and gentlemen, it has been 2 weeks since the last patch notes review video, and of course you guys know what that means. It is time for yet another one. Now, if you guys notice the upload timing here, it's usually one day later than I'm posting here. I might start changing up my posting schedule a little bit in regards to these patch notes review. Wednesday is a little bit difficult because I do usually have work beforehand, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to hunker down on Thursday when I usually don't have work, and then I'll try to get these out for you guys as much as possible. So do look forward to that on Thursdays from now on. Other than that, yeah, let's get straight into the 0.83 banner. Now, I'm going to kind of talk about this a little bit as we go down in the patch. I think it's something that I do want to mention before, like I've been doing in previous patches, just so you guys have an idea of what to look out for. But now that we're all the way through the whole preseason, as well as the early season kind of changes coming through with a lot of different characters, as well as the cooldown changes that we've been seeing pretty recently, we're going back to our usual kind of patches where we're seeing specific changes to characters, nothing too unilateral or anything like that. Although we do have little glimpses of that happening, especially when it comes to weapons down the road. But for characters, it's just going to be regular changes, especially with number changes and just small, minute things that are going to be changing here and there. I don't think this is going to be too complicated of a patch or a huge picture that we have to generalize to begin with. So let's get this started here. And of course, to start off, we're going to start off with the patch change thought, process, and direction. This is just something that usually comes through all the time nowadays. Again, I'm very, very happy about this because it makes it really easy for me to kind of, again, have a generalized idea of what we're going to be going into. Alrighty, so let's see what we do have out here. First of all, I think this is going to be a pretty nice thing for a lot of people. The intuitive part, absolutely a massive part, especially when it comes to animal spawn timers, and we're going to see that in our next tab. Of course, we have it a little down there, but I have another tab for that, so we'll talk about that in just a second. And other than that, I think we're going to see a lot of this in the coming times as certain weapons are going to be much more modernized, certain weapons are going to be much more utilized than other will be on certain characters. So we're going to see some small changes to weapon skills as well as buffs to weapon skills of weapon types. My goodness, I'm saying weapon a lot. That generally aren't being utilized as much as some of the other ones are. So, of course, we're seeing the one over here, sniper weapon skill, a bit. But we are going to go down to the weapons section later, and we'll see a couple of other changes towards weapon skills that do or may have slightly less gameplay than some of the other ones that are in this game right now. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Nothing too crazy, I would say, for the patch change thought process and direction section here. Again, a very simple patch. We're just back to our regular ones. Nimble Neuron's probably trying to keep an eye out on what's going to be happening in the next couple of weeks, as we are starting to head into our competitive season as well. So nothing too crazy is going to be changing now, especially after all that changed during the preseason when it comes to specific characters as well as items. So we'll see what ends up happening with the game in regards to all this in the next coming few weeks. Next up is going to be the adjustments. Now I just kind of scrolled down a little bit. Of course, it's a different tab, but these are going to be the changes to the animal spawn timers, and this should make it a lot more easier for you to kind of be like, oh yeah, this is the time that I'm much more used to before when they spawn. Now, in the past couple of patches, they have changed the duration of night and day spawns, or night and day, I should say, the time for those phases, which is why those animal spawns were all over the place. But this is the one patch where they're going to fix pretty much all of it in one go. Chickens immediately spawn right at the start of the game, so that's not going to change at all. The wild dogs are now going to spawn 40 seconds into the game instead of 50 seconds. No changes to the bats or the boars. The wolves now will spawn at 130 seconds, which means they're going to spawn right at that 1 min mark in day 1, which was the usual case before all the time changes. And the same thing for the bears here as well. It'll be 190 seconds instead of 185 because there was like 5 seconds right before night 1 started, and it was a little bit awkward. It wasn't too massive of a deal, but this should align the bear spawns with the start of night number 1. So again, nothing too crazy. If you played before all the patches that we've recently had, this should feel a lot more natural than it has been in the past couple of, I would say, well, not even the past couple of months, but the past month and a half or so. As I said, guys, pretty simple patch. No augment changes, which means we're going to go straight into the character changes. Of course, it is a new patch, which means we're going to get some characters at a discounted price. Tia, Bianca, and Barbara will be the ones for 0.83. And for the next patch, it's going to be Felix, Mai, and Sua. So if you guys are looking for these characters and you guys have been strapped on A coins or even MP if you want to buy it with that specific currency, this is your chance to. They're going to get a little bit cheaper. At least, actually, they are already a bit cheaper as the patch already came through. So there you go. Let's go down the list though. Again, these changes are going to be very character specific, no big general idea, so it's just going to be things that I'm going to kind of scroll down, and I do have a couple of characters that I do want to mention, but other than that, we'll just kind of go down as it is, just going to be buffs or nerfs depending on what their statistics look like, as they mentioned specifically in the patch change thought process and direction every single patch. For Nikki, we are going to see some early game nerfs and then some late game buffs. Now, she's been a character that's been trying to go for Tree of Life, especially in Temple, has been one of the biggest objectives that she does try to go for. And she is very strong there, very good at being able to rotate through her skills. Of course, Guard and Reverse, always a good skill. And with all the buffs that happen to Nikki, especially when it comes to the damage output, by using these skills a lot more aggressively, she was definitely strong. So they're going to cut down her early game power, but then give her a lot more game power towards the latter stages of the game. You can see 40 damage cut off from the early stages, but immediately implemented back directly in the late game stages, where she does tend to struggle a little bit more compared to her counterparts. Leon is going to see a little bit of a nerf here. Rozzy will also see a nerf as she has been going absolutely bonkers with statistics. Her builds have been insane. Crit plus the Celt changes, especially I think in 0.82, was very much problematic. A lot of damage as long as Rozzys are able to micro correctly, which is pretty much the idea around Rozzy, but if there's almost next to no gameplay for certain characters up against that micro, she is going to need a little bit of a nerf. So 0.3% amplification scaling on her basic attacks will be removed off of Rozzy. And for Luke, we will see a little bit of a buff as he is underperforming in average kills. Rio will see a slight nerf over on her mobility skill, the Soar. Pretty mobile. I think she's one of these characters that still very much relies on being able to outrange somebody, and the moment somebody comes in, you do have a little bit of leeway if you're running healing drone as well as your ultimate, but once that's gone, you're dead. I don't exactly see a big reason as to why they are nerfing the Soar as of right now, but I mean, we do see a lot of Rios, especially towards the later stages of the game, if they do end up getting to that point with a ton of items, almost undealable with. And while you do want to reward these Rio players to getting to that stage where they are at that time, you do also want to give other people a little bit more chances to deal with her instead of just completely giving up the white flag all over the place. So we will see a little bit of nerf over onto Rio. Now, Martina is a character that I do actually have in my notes that I do want to talk about here. We are going to see a little bit more mastery when recording certain things for Martina. She is trailing behind when it comes to the weapon mastery, so they are going to buff that a little bit more. Actually, it's not even a bit more. It's almost 40% for both of them. But the problem with this is the fact that I think Martina right now, especially in solos, is not viable at all. There's way too many things going around the map for Martina to reliably go to a certain objective and get those recording stacks. Now, especially in solos, you're not always going to have 2-3 people fighting over one thing all the time, and just because you do have guaranteed objectives like the Tree of Life, the Meteorites, the Androids, you're usually not going to be able to get 12 stacks until somewhere around day 3, maybe night 3. I should actually say maybe day 3, night 3. So it's very difficult for Martinez to really maneuver around the map, especially when you do not have that broadcast form, which is the bread and butter when it comes to Martinez kit towards the later stages of the game. This is a lot more of a buff towards the team modes variant, where Martina is a lot more effective as she can continuously revive. There's multiple people on her screen to actually guarantee her stacks with, as long as she positions her ultimate correctly. So hopefully this allows her to stay caught up a little bit more, especially when it comes to the weapon levels, as she's going to be continuously recycling her life as she tries to get some of these record stacks. Next up is going to be Bianca. I have seen a little bit of a surge in regards to Bianca players. Her damage is actually not bad, which is why I'm surprised that they are nerfing this, but We'll see a bit of a Bianca nerf. 0.2% is nothing that's going to be absolutely massive, especially when it comes to Bianca's damage output, so we will see what happens there. Sylvia will see a little bit of a buff towards the later stages of the game, as she is going to get a buff on her W, which is the last skill you do level up. So nothing too big when it comes to the early to mid stages, but a bit more versatility and viability of the W skill, both in human form as well as the bike form, towards the later stages of the game. Now, Aya is going to get something that we've done before. We're going to transition a little bit of her scaling straight into her skill instead. So this is actually, in my opinion, a bit more of a nerf over onto Aya, although that's very specific, because when you're using pistol as well as sniper rifle, your bread and butter when it comes to damage is going to be the steady shot, not the double shot. Maybe for sniper rifle it is a little bit different, so you could kind of call it a buff slash nerf over on the sniper rifle. For pistol though, this definitely looks like it is going to work a bit more favor in towards her, as we're going to see some scaling down from her weapon mastery for skill amplification, but immediately adding that back onto the steady shot so that the damage from steady shot is much more reliable instead of the double shot on her Q. Alex will see, from what I've heard, a pretty big nerf. 9-meter range gone from the EMP barrage, which means you can't just throw this all the way miles down to try to block someone's escape. Now it's a little bit closer, so maybe a bit more reactive when it comes to somebody trying to run away instead of trying to prevent somebody from running away. And the cooldown for it will also be nerfed by 5 seconds at all ranks as well. Yan, he's been a little bit problematic in regards to the amount of crowd control. I think Nimble Neuron noticed that, especially with Magic Lamp existing. So now that it is gone, I think Nimble Neuron, still looking back at that, thinks Yan has a little bit too much crowd control. So that means the Tetragon, when you bounce somebody into those walls, they're not going to be stunned as long. But you can see the damage is going to be a lot more massive, as it goes from 50% skill amplification scaling all the way to 80% all in one go. As for Estelle, just a bit of buffs over there on first response as well as hazard shield, nothing too big over there. And Johan will be seeing a slight nerf over onto him, as skill amplification per Arcana Mastery going to be down a little bit. Now, I don't think this is too big of a deal, because he's still scaling really well when he needs to, simply due to the fact that in the previous patches in team modes, he still gets a lot more mastery than he did before. So this is a little bit more balancing the fact that he's still going to get a lot of good mastery, but just because he gets good mastery doesn't mean he gets an over influx of stats going towards him towards the later stages of the game, which is almost unnecessary when it comes to Johan, since you're not really building him for damage, but it's just those things where you have to balance a little bit for this character, and then it makes sense for Nimble Neuron to nerf his damage a little bit. A bit of buffs over onto IRM, as her stats have been a little bit on the shaky side. 11 is also going to see a bit of a buff over on her end as well. A lot of damage going over onto her skills, although again, if you're playing 11, for the most part, you're not really using her skills as damage. It's going to be those auto attacks, so this is one of those things that is just a bit more supportive, more so than anything. Nothing too crazy for 11. Next up is going to be Jackie. Two-handed sword mastery scaling for basic attack amp, down 0.4%. That is something I did not expect, but Jackie has been pretty strong. I actually had one case when I was playing where it was a little bit awkward. I messed up, I definitely did, but the amount of damage that two-handed sword Jackie did do actually surprised me a little bit. So I can see why there might be a nerf, although that's a little bit biased. I'm sorry about that. I'm going to toss in a little bit of that anecdotal moment here, but we are going to see a nerf over onto two-handed sword Jackie. There's been a lot of crit builds going on, especially with the new Erendite route as well. Very, very viable. Jackie will suffer a little bit because of it. Jenny is another character that I do have in my notes here. Now, the reason why I want to talk about her right now is that she has been a bit difficult, I think, for a lot of characters to really deal with. Jenny has turned into a character, instead of doing massive burst amount of damage on her third or fourth shot from Persona, or the weapon that she's going to be running, I guess Stampede back then. Now she's turned into a character that does a lot more consistent damage. Like, she feels, when you're getting shot for her at the start, she feels like a pea shooter, but then when a pea shooter starts shooting like massive amount of bullets at you, like, it's still gonna hurt. That's what Jenny feels like right now. She is really good at getting those consistent shots out. A lot of movement speed built into her kit, especially when it comes to running away as well as chasing somebody. But you can see right here that red carpet is going to get nerfed quite substantially, actually, about 4 seconds nerf over onto every single level of the red carpet. So she's got to be a lot more reserved in regards to how her mobility is actually used, instead of just completely relying on the red carpet to either, peel herself away from somebody or try to pull them in while she's trying to get the damage out. Persona will also see a little bit of a nerf as well, especially on that 4th or 3rd shot. I always forget which one it is when it comes to Jenny, because there's so many numbers when it comes to Jenny, especially back when she used to use Stampede as well as Devil's Marksman. But there you go. Persona's damage is also going to be nerfed a little bit as well. Next up, Chloe, just a bit of a nerf in regards to her max HP, high win rate, and average kills, just lowering her combative stats a little bit to make sure that she's a little bit more balanced from Nimble Neuron's thought point. Now, Theodore, on the other hand, this is a little bit interesting. His Sniper Rifle Mastery, the cooldown reduction, which was changed pretty recently when it comes down to it in those recent scaling changes for each individual character, that's going to be changed over into the attack speed. Now, that's kind of interesting. It says it's going to help him utilize his passive more, but as far as I'm aware, a lot of these skills on passes that change a certain stat that you can't use into a different stat, I think that's what Theodore does. I'm going to have to double check this, and if I'm wrong about what I'm thinking off the top of my head, I'll flash something on the screen, so make sure you guys check out if it is. If not, then there's going to be nothing cool. There's nothing on the screen, but Theodore's attack speed scaling, if I remember correctly, converts to something else, or it's something else that converts into attack speed. I can't remember off the top of my head, but all these passives that kind of change a stat over onto a different stat, if you either go over a certain number or if you have it to begin with. I think something like, what is it? I can't remember her name. Tia might have something like that in her kit. I just can't remember off the top of my head. I'm so sorry, guys. I should have done a little bit more research before I went into this video, but it's typically not efficient, and that makes sense. You don't want to overstat something like back when Adela used to convert some stats on her passive as well. It used to be something really problematic back then, and Nimble Neuron has learned that, but Theodore getting attack speed here, I'm not entirely sure. His auto attacks aren't exactly the bread and butter of his kit. He does use it to proc a lot of things, but it's not like he uses it to actually auto down people like Bernice, for example. So the attack speed here, a little bit questionable. I think he could have definitely made a lot of use of the cooldown reduction instead, but there has also been a lot of buffs over onto his power screens cooldown, so maybe he just doesn't need that. I'm not entirely sure. Next up is going to be Felix, just a bit of nerf over onto his second auto attack. He's been pretty dominating right now, I think, as long as somebody knows how to use him. Even the Diamond Shard as well as the Shadow Stab, Dark Stab, that thing. Oh my god, I'm forgetting everything. My goodness, this is going to be a video where I'm going to look back and I'm going to cringe really hard, but Felix has been pretty difficult to deal with right now. Bit of Retribution good, Frailty good, Adrenaline still usable on him, Diamond Shard, you can pretty much almost use anything on this guy and it'll work out for the most part, so he will see a little bit of a nerf there. Piolo will get a bit of a buff on his side, just for a little bit more sustainability with Omni-Siphon and actually making sure that you use the Punisher or his ultimate in a little bit more offensive fashion. Heart will see a bit of a buff over on her ultimate, so much more utilization of that. Hyunwoo is going to see a lot more ease of access when it comes to, especially the later stages of the game. You're going to have to auto attack or try to get as many stacks as possible, a lot less compared to before, but in return you're going to see a lot less of a return, of course, since it's easier to proc. Now instead of 8 stacks at the end game at level 16, if you do decide to, or not level 16, maybe it's 14 or something like that, when you do decide to max out your passive there, I think it's 9 actually. Oh my goodness. It's going to be only 6 stacks instead of 8, so much easier to proc, but instead of giving you 10% max HP recovery, it's only going to give you 8%. And for those AMP aficionados out there, for the Hyunwoo, we are going to see a bit of a buff towards them as well, as we are going to see a 0.5 second cooldown buff over onto the Stomping Foot for the base. Last but not least, Hyejin will see a bit of a nerf over onto her ultimate as well. Both the base damage as well as her amplification scaling is going to get cut down on her ultimate. Nothing too crazy. pretty simple across the board. But that's going to do it for all the character changes. Again, nothing too standardized. It's just all specifically character based as well as the statistics based. And it looks about right. Just looking at the graph that they usually provide, or I should say the chart that they usually provide with these patch notes, it's fine. There's a couple of things that, again, I'm kind of confused about, like the Theodore stuff, but overall, it seems like changes that do make sense in regards to the characters that I do see a little bit on the dominating side, or a little bit higher on the pick side, or even on the opposite end too, a bit on the lower pick side and all that jazz. So pretty stable, I should say, patch for 0.83, especially when it comes to the character changes. And leading straight from that, of course, we're going to go directly onto the weapons. Now, weapons are going to be pretty standard here as well. I think I should have talked about this earlier, but I talked about how sniper skill, weapon skill is going to change. We're going to talk about that here as well. But also, a lot of other weapon skills are going to change as well. The ones that have low utility or low utilization, they're going to see a little bit of buffs on their weapon skill to maybe ramp up their utilization a little bit more. Another thing that we are going to see throughout the weapons that's going to be pretty consistent, and you can already see in glove, we are seeing that here in our first section, where all weapons, or most weapons with the basic attack amplification scaling, or even that stat in and of itself, as you can see with Divine Fist, we'll see a bit of an adjustment in regards to its stats. Much more of a nerf, just looking at the numbers right now, more so than it is a buff or a readjustment, but we're going to see a bit of a nerf on the specific stat of basic attack amplification, diverting that into a bit of attack power here instead. So let's get started here. For gloves, Divine Fist and Mark of the Phoenix doing exactly what I just said. Basic attack amplification, or the scaling part of it down, and attack power will be buffed here instead. Moving reload on pistol, very overutilized. Pistol is still a very, very good weapon, especially towards the later stages of the game. The amount of movement speed you get out of this is absolutely absurd. So we are going to see a 10-second cooldown nerf on that weapon skill, which is a pretty massive nerf. It's a skill that a lot of pistol characters do tend to use throughout multiple fights back and forth. So that 10-second nerf is going to hurt them a lot, especially in between fights as well. Guitar, nothing too crazy here. A bit of buffs over onto Satisfaction and Teen Spirit. Assault Rifle, we're going to see something pretty similar here as well, as Judgment's actually going to get only a nerf with the scaling there. A bit of a nerf over onto AK as well as Black Widow. Rapier, we're going to see a bit of a buff on this weapon, as not too many people have been running Rapier, especially Fiora is not many of them running Rapier, especially with how prevalent two-handed sword and spear is. Even Camillo still opting, I should say, to use the dual sword instead of Rapier for the most part, unless you're going for some weird shenanigans with this weapon type. For the bat, Vajra, just a bit of a buff over onto the crit strike chance. Legend of the General will get buffed for crossbow. Dual swords, Asura is going to get a buff, so this is much more focused, I would say, on the side of maybe Kathy's, unless you're deciding to run the other one. There are still some builds that do tend to run Asura, so we'll see a bit of a buff there. And for Nunchakus, we're going to see a buff all across the board for Blue 3 as well as Vibrant Nunchaku. Now, it is a nerf for Vibrant Nunchaku when it comes to the base stats, but we do have Vigor being added back onto it, and it is going to be a whole 10 attack power added back onto this weapon once you do start hitting those max stacks, as well as 20% attack speed, which is, of course, way more than what you normally started out with. So, Vibrant Nunchaku going towards the Vigor stage here now. No real transitions for this, of course, because Cerberus doesn't have Vigor. It's just a straight-up stat stick, and there aren't any other attack power based Nunchaku transitions around. Maybe with Vigor, we might start seeing another Nunchaku come in later on as a transition for the Vigor part, or Nimona might just be kind of hinting at this as a decent way to transition into the Cerberus, as Cerberus still has the idea of what Vibrant Nunchaku wants to do with the attack power as well as the attack speed. Going down, Arcana Temperance will give a little bit less recovery, so this is much more towards most likely the Biancas or even the Johans that are using this a little bit too well in correspondence with some other items that exists in the game, as well as their healing potential. Shuriken Petal Torrent will see a bit of a buff, as this still is not being that utilized for the most part. From the looks of it, it's going to go down to 3 seconds compared to 5. Monohoshizel will see a buff there. Levitine, same thing as all the other basic attack amp versions. Well, this is much more in line, especially with the Judgment, but a nerf towards the basic attack amplification scaling. And for Sniper, the one that we saw earlier, we're going to see a nerf over on its cooldown, so people who are using Sniper Rifle like the Bernice aren't just going to be constantly spamming this as soon as they make some distance away from you, but this time it's not going to be grounding, it's going to be for slows. So a lot more consistency in regards to how well you can hit the second shot with the Sniper Rifle, assuming you do end up hitting the first one. Of course, not grounding somebody means that they can use a mobility skill, but I think the slow is going to be a lot more useful, especially for characters like Bernice or any other sniper rifle characters that most likely the other person already had to use their mobility skill to get onto you in the first place, which means they're most likely not going to have it. Blackfire Cannon will get a little bit of a buff here as well, the additional skill damage. Of course, not a huge part of Blackfire Cannon, but it will get buffed 25 damage. Blazing Lance, same thing as all the other ones, a bit of a nerf over onto its scaling. And for cameras, nothing too crazy here, a interesting change over onto cannon camera, as it is going to get attack speed and a bit of a nerf over onto attack power. And for Tonfa, we will actually see a huge buff at level 1 cooldown. Now, this is quite interesting. A lot of Tonfa characters that decide to use this. I think one of the best utilizers of Quick Spin was Alex, but with the recent changes, there's a lot of people that are actually, even in 0.82, I should say, yeah, in 0.82, not that many people were running Tonfa, if any. No one was really running this weapon because Amplification Alex has kind of disappeared with the recent changes to Alex. There's a lot more auto attack builds that are much more popular, and I think with 0.83, it's going to be even more prevalent with the ultimate change that he did indeed get during this patch. So I'm not entirely sure if this is going to be much more on the offensive side. I think it just allows a lot more of those, other characters like Isaac as well as Hyunwoo, who kind of likes to use this a lot more defensively, more so than offensively, to be able to do that a little bit more consistently, which in my opinion is a bit of an unfortunate situation. This could have been so massive for Alex if he still decided to use Tonfa, but he's kind of running a 3-weapon rotation with Shuriken pistol as well as 2-handed sword now. If anything, he's running 2, especially with the crit variant, so not too big of a deal, I should say. The damage on this reflected is still not that big, especially at level 1, so nothing too crazy there. And for throw, just some small stat changes across the board. Same thing for bow as well. Argy's going to be a bit nerfed over there, and Fail Not will actually be nerfed pretty massively as it's going to lose a 5 whole attack power. Now, continuing straight down, we're going to go straight towards the armor here. Nothing too crazy for heads or even the legs, just some small buffs and nerfs. Even for accessories, it's going to be a bit of a change here. Schrodinger box is purely going to be for shield breaking for amplification characters. It's going to lose that skill amp 5 stat. And for Lunar Embrace, it's going to be nerfed a little bit. There's been a lot of people deciding to use this, especially after the changes to Hero's Record. This is the only real kind of steroid item that exists in the game now that is much more utilizable by pretty much everyone across the board. So we're going to see a bit of a nerf here, as it has been getting a lot more popularity in recent times. Just nerfs over onto the attack power increase as well as the defense increase, and a nerf to the cooldown as well. But that's going to be it for both the item changes on the weapon side and the armor side. Again, nothing too crazy here, especially on the armor piece side. There hasn't been too many changes, but that's because a lot of time from my thoughts has been spent on the characters for this 0.83 patch. So yeah, pretty simple when it comes down to the items. Now let's go on over onto the next section. As per usual, our next section here is going to be the new content that's going to be coming through in this patch too. New skins and emotes, and of course you can see here an absolutely beautiful skill here for Nightmare Holder Vanya. And of course, as it is Season 9, you can obtain the skin through the Maze Nightmare Journal event. Maze coming right around the corner, so this skin should be obtainable through that event. Not exactly sure what's going to be happening on it, but we should be able to see that very soon. The next skin that we are going to get is going to be Popstar Camillo. He's going to be available through the Dear Camillo event. Also, yet another great skin being added into the game. And this is going to be great. Camillo kind of has been in need for a skin, and this skin looks absolutely wonderful. I'm just hoping that it looks really good in game as well, but the color scheme in and of itself makes it pretty nice looking already to begin with, so hopes are high there. Scrolling down, Nathapon emotes. Now this is going to be pretty hype for some North American players because there hasn't been too much love when it comes to accessories for Nathapon, so this is going to be pretty massive. But yes, the Nathapon emote as well as the pack is going to be released here in 0.83. You do have the 4 emotes as well as the additional skin coming through here as well. It's going to be for 1640 MP at a 40% discount. So make sure you grab it if you are opting to go for the Nathapon accessories in the game with the emotes as well as the skin. This is going to be the first time we're also seeing some special bundles actually going to be on sale in Eternal Return. Hyunwoo and Lee Dailin special bundles will be available for purchase. In short, you're going to get the character, you're going to get a couple of skins, you're going to get a border, as well as some profile pictures to boot, and then a couple of additional boosts that you do end up getting here. So if you do want to get a lot of those at a discount, of course, because you do see the 40% discount right there as well, make sure you do end up grabbing it. If you do have the character or the skins already, then you will get a massive discount. I think for me right now, the Dylan one's somewhere like 700, 800 when the default price is 2,900. So make sure you do grab it if you do want to go for it. This, on the other hand, I'm still a little bit off about because I'd rather just purchase the emotes, borders, and the icons as well as the backgrounds by themselves. But no, they're going to make you buy the entire bundle. This is something that I think a lot of players kind of had certain feelings about for quite a while, but it is what it is. The special bundle is going to be the special bundle, so make sure you guys do grab it if you do want to. I'm personally probably going to grab the Dylan one. There's no bias going around on there, but there you are. That's going to be all the new content coming through in 0.83. And that's going to be it, guys. 0.83. Again, back to our regular kind of scheduled patches, right? No generalized thing, no massive big picture that we need to think about. Think about. It's just plain changes according to statistics, just like the usual times. Not too many item changes in this patch either. Most character changes are pretty much stat or, whatever oriented. I guess I was about to say competitive, but we haven't had any competitive things going on during preseason, so it's going to be a lot more stat driven, and yeah, it makes sense. There's not that many items that really need to be changed right now. I think a lot of things are kind of character based, as we are going to see throughout the course of this patch, or at least we saw throughout the course of this patch, so nothing too massive there. Nothing too big to note either. Pretty standalone patch. I said it throughout the course of this patch notes review. Man, nothing too massive to talk about. Although I will say, this patch in and of itself, I think, signifies something that is going to be coming in the near future that I think a lot of players, especially in international regions, have also kind of seen or at least felt. In international regions, there's been a lot more interest in duos as well as squads, and that's kind of a given. I think if you've been playing the game for about the past season or so, a lot of people are much more inclined to play team modes. I don't know if it's necessarily an even split between duos and squads right now, but North America is going kind of all in on squads at the moment. We're having frequent squads pops throughout the course of the week, and even on weekends when squads ranked is popping, I heard it pops a lot. These changes are going to affect team modes a lot as well. And is it really going to change the dynamics of what kind of characters are going to be brought out in North America or even international play? I don't think so, because certain people in international regions are known for playing certain characters. That's, to a certain extent, all they really play. So internationally, I don't think too much is going to change unless teams are just deciding to bring out massive changes to their team roster. Korea, on the other hand, they really like to mess around with strategies, and this patch in and of itself, as we are going to start heading into, again, our competitive Season 4, Season 9, ERM is coming up. We do have some Lumia Marathon-related tournaments for North America coming up here soon as well. We'll be seeing well, I'll be keeping track, at least, in regards to what kind of things are going to be changing in the next couple of months until we start hitting that mark going into the season finals for both international and the Korean regions. Patch overall, nothing too crazy for me, which means I'm going to give it a solid, I think, 7.5 out of 10. Pretty average. Nothing too big to note, nothing too big to talk about when it comes to bad changes about this patch. It's one of those where I just read it, said okay, and just kind of close it. But of course, what I talk about really doesn't matter. I just want to give you guys a little brief on what the patch notes is about. What really matters is what you guys think. So let me know down in the comments below what you guys think about this patch 0.83, our first patch outside of the first patch in the official season. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. I think I've already rambled on a little bit too much. So I'll let you guys tell me what you guys think about this patch down in the comments below. But other than that, guys, thank you guys for joining me here for yet another patch notes review. I'll see you guys back here for 0.83 in 2 weeks, and hopefully by then I'll have a little bit more competitive stories to back up what I want to talk about in these patches. I'll see you guys later. Have a wonderful day.